In a last-minute reprieve for millions of Americans, two federal judges have ordered the Trump administration to continue funding the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, averting a lapse in food aid that was set to begin today, November 1st. The rulings came just hours before funding was scheduled to expire due to the ongoing government shutdown, providing near-term relief to roughly 42 million people who rely on the program. The first emergency order came from U.S. District Judge Indira Talwani in Massachusetts. She ruled that the plaintiffs, a coalition of 25 Democratic governors and state attorneys general, are likely to succeed in their claim that suspending the benefits is unlawful. Judge Talwani ordered the government to provide a plan by this coming Monday detailing how it will keep the program funded. Moments later, a separate federal judge in Rhode Island, John McConnell, issued a similar order instructing the administration to tap its emergency funds to pay for SNAP benefits as soon as possible. The legal challenges arose after the Trump administration announced it would not use the Agriculture Department's $5 billion contingency fund to cover November's SNAP payments, stating the funds were being held in reserve for natural disasters. This would have marked the first time in the program's 60-year history that benefits lapsed because of a government shutdown. In court, Judge Talwani had expressed sympathy for the state's arguments, calling the potential cuts devastating and stating, "It's hard for me to understand how this isn't an emergency when there's no money, and a lot of people need their SNAP benefits." The Justice Department has not yet said whether it will appeal either ruling. The rulings on SNAP benefits are part of a broader landscape of legal battles challenging the administration's executive actions. In a separate case, a federal judge ruled on Thursday that President Trump cannot require voters to provide proof of citizenship to register to vote using the federal form. U.S. District Judge Colleen Collar-Catelli in Washington, D.C., issued an order prohibiting the U.S. Election Assistance Commission from updating the form as directed by a presidential executive order from March. In her 81-page opinion, Judge Collar-Catelli wrote that the president lacks the authority to unilaterally direct such changes to federal election procedures. She affirmed that the Constitution assigns the responsibility for regulating elections primarily to the states and to Congress, not to the executive branch. The ruling was a victory for the Democratic National Committee and other groups that had filed lawsuits arguing the requirement was an overreach of presidential power and would create barriers for eligible voters. However, perhaps the most monumental constitutional test of executive power is set to unfold this coming Wednesday at the Supreme Court. The justices will hear oral arguments in a landmark case challenging the scope of President Trump's authority to impose widespread import tariffs. The case consolidates lawsuits from a coalition of small businesses and several Democratic-led states. They argue that the president has abused his authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, by declaring a national emergency to impose levies on nearly every country in the world. The plaintiffs contend that this action usurps the constitutional power of Congress to lay and collect taxes and duties. Lower federal courts have previously ruled against the administration. In its appeal to the High Court, the Justice Department warns that denying the president this tariff authority would expose the nation to trade retaliation without effective defenses and could have catastrophic consequences for national security and the economy. The financial and political stakes are enormous, with the court's decision expected to have immediate effects on both domestic and global economies. Legal analysts note that this will be the first major test on the merits of the White House's aggressive second-term agenda, and the outcome could reshape the balance of power between the president and Congress for decades. The case is being closely watched as an indicator of how the court's 6-3 conservative majority views the limits of presidential power, especially with other major cases on executive authority, including the president's ability to fire members of federal agencies, also on the docket for this term. And as the Supreme Court prepares to deliberate on the legality of these broad tariff powers, a new and specific set of tariffs takes effect today, November 1st. The United States is now imposing a 25% tariff on all imports of medium and heavy-duty trucks. This move is expected to have the most significant impact on Mexico and Canada, the two largest sources of such imports to the U.S. According to official trade data from 2024, the U.S. imported a total of $12 billion worth of these trucks. Mexico accounted for nearly half of that, at $5.9 billion, while Canada supplied $3.3 billion worth, or 27% of the total. The U.S. trade deficit with Mexico alone for these vehicles soared above $5.1 billion last year. While the tariffs are expected to raise costs and create uncertainty for many businesses, some domestic manufacturers are viewing the policy favorably. Preston Feight, the CEO of U.S. truck manufacturer PACCAR, stated in a recent earnings call that the new tariff is good for the company's customers, as it will reduce costs associated with previous tariff structures and bring clarity to the market. Meanwhile, away from the courts and international trade, significant political developments are taking shape at the state level ahead of next year's midterm elections. In Ohio, a state redistricting commission on Thursday unanimously approved new congressional maps. The new boundaries, which garnered bipartisan support from both Republican and Democratic commissioners on the panel, could allow Republicans to win 2 additional seats in the House of Representatives. The maps significantly alter the districts currently held by 2 Democrats, Representative Greg Landsman of the 1st District and Representative Marcy Kaptur of the 9th District, making them more competitive for Republican challengers. The commission was operating under a constitutional deadline to enact the new maps by October 31st. The unanimous and bipartisan approval in Ohio stands in contrast to the often contentious and partisan battles that typically define the redistricting process in many states. Elsewhere in Virginia, state lawmakers are also advancing their own redistricting plan. However, that process is in an earlier stage, with several steps still outstanding before any new maps in that state can be finalized.